This is chapter 45. We're going to continue our lesson on Genesis, and we're going to look at Joseph finally is going to reveal himself to his brothers. It gets really interesting. Up until now, we've seen that when Joseph's brothers went to Egypt for food because of the famine, that Joseph asked them about his family, the rest of his brothers, or actually one other brother at that point, and he wanted to know how his dad was doing. They didn't know that it was Joseph. He knew that they were his brothers. They said, yeah, we have another brother, a younger brother, and we have another one. One is not. Later on, they said that he's dead. And they said, yes, and our father is still alive. So Joseph obviously was naturally curious about the rest of his family. And he told them, okay, here's what's going to happen. I want you to bring back your younger brother, Benjamin. And I'm going to keep one of you guys here hostage. Who was that? Who did they keep? Simeon. He kept Simeon and said, okay, you guys go back to your family. Here's some food that I'm going to give you. They paid for it, but they ended up putting the money back in their sacks. He said, you go back home and you bring back Benjamin. If you want Simeon released, you're going to have to bring back Benjamin. They go down. They explain everything to their dad, Jacob. Jacob says, no way. You're not taking Benjamin. I already lost one boy. And now if you take Benjamin, what happens if something happens to him? Now he was so concerned about Benjamin because Benjamin and Joseph were full brothers. And when they were the only, Benjamin was the only full brother of Joseph. Both of those boys having Rachel as their mother. The others were his half-brothers. And Benjamin is the youngest one left. So Jacob is saying, no, you're not taking Benjamin. If something happens to Benjamin, like something happened to Joseph, or if he doesn't come back, it'll be too much for me to bear. I'm going to die of a broken heart. They plead with their dad and they say, listen, the only way we can go back to get Simeon and to get more food is if we take Benjamin. This guy over there, this leader, this ruler of Egypt, he accused us of being spies. And he said that the only way that he's going to believe us that we're not spies is if we return to Benjamin. We have to go back with Benjamin, or there's no sense in us going back. And then Simeon's going to stay there, and they're going to make a slave out of him. You'll never see him again. So, reluctantly, Jacob agrees. He says, oh, you guys are so much trouble. Why did you have to tell him that you had a younger brother? Why did you even tell him? He said, Dad, how are we supposed to know that he was going to react like that? He asked us. We can't lie to him. He was already accusing us of lying. How are we supposed to know that he was going to put that stipulation on us and say that we couldn't return without Benjamin? So Jacob, oh man, he's doubting, he's apprehensive, he's reluctant, and finally he breaks down, and out of desperation, because eventually they ran out of the food that they had gotten the first time. So with all those circumstances, he says, okay, fine, go ahead and take Benjamin. Go back and get some more food. Go back and get Simeon. And man, you guys better not mess this up. So he goes back, or they go back with Benjamin. And they get more food. And what happens? Now Joseph knows that it's his brothers. And they plant something in Benjamin's sack when they're going back to Canaan, back home to their dad with the food that they got the second time. They framed these guys. They planted an item that belonged to Joseph. What was it? Joseph's silver cup. And they called it his diviner's cup that he uses to divine. And I went through that, whether he actually did or not, okay, we're not going to get into all that again. But it was his special, significant diviner's cup of Joseph's. Some special cup. Expensive silver cup. They put it in Benjamin's sack. They're going back home. And all of a sudden, Joseph says, hey guys, they stole my cup. Go get them. And Joseph sends his servants, and here comes the cops. Woo, woo, woo. Coming back. Pull over. Everybody, get out. Get off of your donkey. Put your hands on the donkey's back. I'm going to search you. And he says, who do you guys think you are? Here we are doing you a favor. We're generous enough to these Hebrews. You guys aren't even Egyptians. You guys are these lower class citizens. And you're coming to us for refuge, for food. And we're kind enough to sell you guys food because of the famine. And then you have the nerve to steal Joseph's cup. This special cup. Who do you guys think you are? Did you think you could get away with it? Don't you know that Joseph is able to divine and know and tell that you guys did it? And they have no idea what's going on because number one, they didn't take it. It was secretly planted. And even though it's in Benjamin's sack, Benjamin doesn't know that he has it. So they're saying, no. This got to be a mistake. This is a mistake. This is an oversight. This is you got the wrong guy. This is a mistaken identity. You know, my brother-in-law a few years ago got pulled over by the police in Aiea. He lives out there. I heard the story. He said that the cops pulled him over and they got out with their guns drawn and they told him to get out of the car, and they said, I mean, it's really serious. They said, get out of the car. I don't know if they got on the radio or something. I don't even think they approached the car. I think they got on the radio that loud, and they said, get out of the car, and they said, put your hands up, get down on your knees. Now get down on the street, on the pavement, spread your arms and your legs, the whole bit, just like you see on TV on Cops or something, and guns drawn and just a big scene. And they went over there, and I guess they cuffed him and everything, and it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Because I think the story was that his license, they ran his plate or something, and his name was the same name as somebody who was on the wanted list as a dangerous fugitive. And he had no idea what was going on. And, this guy's a nice, mellow guy, and not confrontational at all. What do you think he thought? And this is kind of like what's going on here. And so Joseph's brothers are thinking, what? No, we wouldn't do that. You got to be crazy. We didn't do that. What happens? They search from the oldest, starting with Reuben, all the way down to Benjamin. And guess what happens? Benjamin's sack, they open that thing up. Bam! There it is. And what the rest of the brothers were thinking? They were thinking, what? Benjamin? You actually would steal that? Are you crazy? You want to get us killed? And what's Benjamin thinking? No, I didn't take it. So, Judah starts pleading and begging with Joseph, saying, please have mercy on us. Don't take Benjamin. You can take me as a slave instead of Benjamin. You can't take Benjamin because here's what happened. Remember the first time you accused us of being spies and you asked about our family, you asked about if we had another brother, you asked us about our dad, and we told you everything. We said that yes, we have a younger brother and we have another brother who's dead, he was killed, and our dad he's old and he's still alive. And when we came back and we told our dad not to return to Egypt for food without Benjamin, and he wouldn't even let us go. He said, no, you can't take him because I already lost one son, and if you take Benjamin and something happens to Benjamin, I'll go down to the grave in tears. I'll die of a broken heart. You please, you cannot take Benjamin from us. It'll kill our dad. And Joseph is overcome with emotion when he hears that. And he sees how desperate they are, and he sees and he learns how troubled and grieved his own father is about them taking Benjamin, thinking that Joseph is dead and Benjamin is the only son of Rachel, left. And so let's pick it up in chapter 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried. Now, when he's crying here, it's not like weeping, crying, not yet. It means he's with a loud voice. He says, "Cause every man to go out from me." So he tells the Egyptian servants and everybody else in there, he said, "Leave the room so I can stay here with these Hebrews, just me and them." He says, "Everybody go out into the other room." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers, and they're going to get the shock of their lives. In verse 2, and he wept aloud. Now he's really crying. He's weeping, he's crying. And this is the third time that Joseph cries. Joseph cries a total of 7 times in this narrative, 7 being the number of completion. And this is the third time, and it says, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. He's crying loudly. He sent them away. He doesn't want them to witness this. And he tells them to go into the other room or go into the other chamber or go outside or wherever it is. And he's crying so loud that everybody else, all the other royalty and the servants of Egypt, they can hear him crying. And I wonder what they're thinking. They're thinking, what in the world's going on? Why is Joseph crying with these Hebrews who came to get food? What's going on? Let's stay close by. I mean, what if they try to attack him or something? This is just weird. Verse 3. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Now I'll bet you, when he told everybody to go out, and then they hear him crying, they're so curious and concerned that, what in the world's going on? Have you ever been in the other room, and you're trying to eavesdrop and listen to another conversation, or an argument or something in the other room, and you're, trying to listen, and you don't want anybody to find out, or you don't want them to come in the room right away while you're doing that, and you're trying to listen. I remember on one of recent trips a couple years ago, it was my wife Hannah and I. We're actually on a storm chasing trip. I took my mom with us. She loved it, and we were staying in this motel in Texas. We heard this commotion outside in the hallway. It woke us up. These guys yelling and arguing and stuff. And we said, what's going on? And we're listening, and those guys, I think sounds like these guys are drunk. And then we hear this commotion, and all of a sudden, then we hear the police. You could hear the radio and all that. You can tell it's the police. And we're listening, what's going on? What's going on? And we hear one of the cops get one of the guys and says something like, put your hands behind your back and shove him against the hallway door, and he boom, and we're listening, what's going on? It's the police. He's getting arrested. Oh, man, what else? Oh, and then we're listening. We're trying to listen to the conversation. It's so funny. We know what we found out. We had talked to the person at the front desk, and we could also hear the conversation with the police. These 2 guys had went out drinking, came back to the motel, and they couldn't find their room. And so they have the room key, and they're trying to put it in all these different doors, and obviously it's not going to unlock the door because it's the wrong key, because they can't find their room. So they're just sitting there in the hallway by the Coke machine or something, just sitting there all belligerent and drunk. And so we found out that the person at the front desk tried to help them and assist them and said, well, why don't you tell us what your name is, and we can look it up on the records, and we'll be able to tell you what your room number is. They got all defensive and said, we're not going to give you our name. This, thought it was some invasion of privacy. So they're just sitting there in the hallway again by the Coke machine or the snack machine or something, and making a lot of noise and commotion, all drunk. So the front desk called the police because they said these guys are trying to get into all these different rooms, and you know, they might get into the wrong room. And guess what? The police came, and we could hear through the door, and the police said, they said, well, we're staying in the hotel, and they said, you're staying in jail tonight. You're getting arrested. He said, getting arrested for what? He said, public intoxication. And he said, public intoxication? But we're not in public. We're staying here. We have a room. He said, let me see the room key. And the cop got the room key and said, this is the wrong motel. You're supposed to be, this motel is the other motel down the road. These guys were so drunk they came to the wrong motel, and that's why they couldn't get into the room. So we're trying to listen and eavesdrop and have our. I can imagine that the servants there, they're trying to listen because they hear Joseph crying. They're curious, they're concerned, and they're trying to listen to what he's saying. And then they can maybe make out something, and they're trying to. What's he saying? What's he saying? He's speaking Hebrew. He's speaking in Hebrew. Now, up until this time, had Joseph been speaking Hebrew to his brothers? Remember, it said he spoke to them by an interpreter. Now he's speaking Hebrew. And all of a sudden they're thinking, whoa, how does this Egyptian ruler know Hebrew? And it's the servants and everybody probably listening. They can't understand Hebrew, but they probably know what Hebrew sounds like. Joseph is speaking Hebrew. Now they know Joseph is a Hebrew. They know his background, the people who are listening, not his brothers. He's speaking Hebrew. And they're probably thinking, probably asking, well, why didn't he speak Hebrew to them before? Why is he speaking Hebrew to them now? Well, what is he saying? Well, I don't know Hebrew, but I know Hebrew when I hear it. He's speaking Hebrew to his brothers, and they're probably shocked. And it says, verse 3, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? Well, I thought they told him that the father was alive. And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Why would they be troubled at his presence? Yeah. Now, if this finally seeks in, they're thinking, what? How? What? Why? Is it really? And they're probably thinking, and they're looking. Now, over 20 years have passed. Joseph was 17 when they sold him. A 17-year-old teenage boy, after 20 years, there can be a lot of changes. So they're looking. Is it? Oh, he does. Wait, that little birthmark that he had, it's that. Oh, is it? Oh my gosh, it is! And Joseph said unto his brethren, verse 4, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And now it's really sinking in. They're like, if this isn't Joseph, he would know that we sold him into Egypt. It really is Joseph now, because he knows we sold him into Egypt. Oh my God, we're done. We are done for. They're probably thinking he's going to have him killed. And he could have. He had the power to. And verse 5, now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years. So remember, the famine was going to be 7 years long, right? 7 plenteous years followed by 7 the years of famine. So 2 years, and then there's 5 to go. In the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. Earing means plowing. Verse 7, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Now, there's a lot about this that I need to talk about. Go over to chapter 50 And look at another verse that is similar to what he's saying after Jacob dies. In verse 20 of chapter 50. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. This is probably the best illustration, the Old Testament illustration of Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. God used a bad situation and brought good out of it for his glory and his purpose. Now, notice he says in verse 5, Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Joseph is saying, it was all in God's plan for this to happen in order that I would be exalted after giving me the ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and to save not just Egypt, but to save my own household, my own family, because of the famine. Now let me ask you this. Were they wrong in selling him into slavery? Yes. But it almost sounds like he's saying that it was God who orchestrated the whole thing. Now, the hyper-Calvinists will take this verse, and the hyper-Calvinists will say, see, that everything has been preordained by God, and that some will say, go so far as to say, everything that happens is the will of God, good or bad, because God has predestined and preordained everything for his own purpose and for his own pleasure. And they will use this verse and other verses like it, where they are saying, see, it really wasn't his brothers doing it, selling him into slavery. It was really God doing it. Now, here's the problem with that. If you take that to its logical conclusion, you would have to say, and some of them do say, that everything that happens, including sin, is God's will. You don't believe me? I mean, you don't believe me as far as people saying, some people teaching that? Some people do teach that. I was listening to a radio debate on YouTube with a Bible theologian and a prominent Calvinist. And they were going through this. And there was also a pastor, a co-host on the show. And they were debating, and they asked this Calvinist, a very well-known Calvinist, about his position. And he was alluding to verses like this. And they asked him, they said, okay, let me ask you a question. And they brought up a scenario which unfortunately is all too common. They said, if a child gets kidnapped and abused and these terrible things that happen, is it God's will? And the Calvinist, in a roundabout way, said yes. But, well, the reason why he didn't directly say yes is because the listening audience would say, that's ridiculous, that's heresy. But what he said was, all things happen, God's will, for his own pleasure, this, that. And so, he was indirectly answering yes. And he said, we don't understand why, but God, for some reason, not just allows things, but preordains these things to happen. And everything that happens is preordained by God, and God, for whatever reason we don't understand, does these things, and it's his will when they happen. Now, that's not what I'm saying. Now, see, God uses situations. That does not mean that because God has sovereignty and foreknowledge and intervention, that does not relinquish the personal free will of man. You understand? And so you have to find the balance, the sovereignty of God and the free will of man. The hyper-Calvinist will say, see, look, it wasn't them. They thought they were doing it, but it was actually God, in a sense, making them do it. And the reason why the Calvinist will use those verses and that, because the Calvinist does not teach that an individual has free will to get saved, to receive the gospel. They say, you are predestined before the foundation of the world to get saved or not. And it's not your own free will receiving Christ and believing the gospel. irresistible grace, unconditional election, all of that, the TULIP acronym. Now let me show you some verses that show that that is not true. Now when he says in verse 5, "Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves," he's not saying, it's okay that you sinned, don't worry about it. What he's saying is, don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for my sake. Don't think that you did something terrible to me and you don't have to worry about that, because look what happened in the end. Look at the outcome of it. God used it for his glory and for your benefit. So he's saying, don't worry, I'm not holding it against you. I'm not upset that you did this. He's not saying, oh, well, you sinned, but don't worry about your sin. He's not saying don't be grieved for God's sake. He's saying don't be grieved for my sake. Now let me show you some verses. Go to Acts chapter 2. And let me show you that there are some things that God has ordained, and they have come to pass, and men are still held accountable for their sin, even though it was God's plan in the whole thing. Sovereignty of God and the free will of man. Look at Acts chapter 2, verse 22. Peter preaching, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know." Look at verse 23. "Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God." Okay, there's the sovereignty of God. God says back in eternity, my son is going to die for the sins of the world. That's my plan. I'm predestinating it. I'm ordaining it. Okay, you got that? But let's keep on reading. Now we look at the free will of man. "Ye have taken and by wicked hands have crucified and slain." Now, was it preordained that Jesus would die? Yes. Was it God's plan? Yes. Was it God's will? Yes. The men who did it, were they guilty of doing it? Yes. Did God make them do it? No. God did not make them do it. God knew they would do it. Foreknowledge. Omniscient, all-knowing. God knew they would do it. God had it all planned. Are they held responsible for doing it? Yes. Did they have free will? Were they puppets on a string that God was orchestrating and saying, reject Christ, Israel, reject him as your Messiah. The Romans, crucify him, do it, do it. No. They were not robots. They had their own free will. Will you say, well, what if would they exercise their free will and they didn't do it? Well, God had it all planned out where he knew somebody else would do it. You know what I mean? And besides, you can't go back into time and say, well, what if? God already knew in his foreknowledge that they would. So it doesn't really matter. That what if, they did it. And they're held accountable. Look at something else. Go to Acts chapter 7. Stephen preaching. Verse 52, "Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted, and they have slain them which showed before of the coming of the just one, of whom ye have been now the betrayers and murderers." They're guilty of murder, murdering Jesus Christ, murdering their Messiah. Did God make them do that? No. Now, God knew that Jesus would be betrayed by Judas. God did not make Judas do it. Jesus said it would be better if that man was never born. Go to Luke chapter 17. By the way, who killed Jesus? How did Jesus die? Who was responsible? The Romans? Didn't Jesus say, "No man take my life from me"? Didn't Jesus say the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep? Huh? Wait a minute. Well, I thought it was Israel. We just read it in Acts. I thought it was the Romans. Didn't in Isaiah chapter 53, didn't it say it pleased the Lord to bruise him? Didn't God kill him? Sacrificed his only son, just like Abraham offering Isaac? Now wait a minute. So you know what we have in the Bible? We have God being responsible for killing Jesus. We have Jesus responsible for him laying down his own life. We have the Romans responsible. We have Israel responsible. How can 4 different groups be responsible for the same thing? And how can they be held responsible and being told they're murderers and they did it by wicked hands if Jesus himself laid down his own life and God is the one who did it? Now you see what's going on? There's a pattern there. There's a pattern in the Bible. Who afflicted Job? Satan or God? Then why did God tell Satan, "Thou hast moved me against him without cause"? You see what's going on? Is the Bible contradicting? No. I'll clear it all up for you in a second. Look at Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17, verse 1. Then said he unto the disciples, It is impossible, but that offenses will come, but woe unto him through whom they come. In other words, it is true, yes, bad things are going to happen. That's true. Make sure you're not the one doing it, though.
The one doing it's going to be held accountable.
That's right. Now, this idea about God predestinating and preordaining everything, even the bad things, as far as the brothers selling Joseph into slavery, and somebody saying, it's not really their fault. They didn't really have free will. God's the one who did it. In fact, Joseph himself says God did it in one of the verses. But he's not meaning that they were not responsible, accountable. He's meaning that God uses the wickedness of mankind sometimes for his glory. He does. He did it when they crucified his son. It was God's will for Jesus to be crucified. It was not God's will for individuals to reject Jesus Christ. You understand? It's not his will that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance, right? But God uses these certain situations and uses the fact that these people do these things. Now go to Jeremiah chapter 19. And I'm going to show you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God does not preordain people to commit wickedness. Jeremiah chapter 19. He can make good things out of bad situations. He can work bad things for good. But that doesn't mean that he causes people to sin. It doesn't mean it's his will for people to sin. It doesn't mean that it has been preordained before the foundation of the world for people to sin. Jeremiah chapter 19 verse 5, and it certainly doesn't mean that people don't have a free will. Jeremiah chapter 19 verse 5. They have built also the high places of Baal, to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. Now, if everything was preordained and eternally decreed, then that means that that thing would have come into God's mind. But he said, no, it never even entered my mind for you to do this, nor for me to command it. You understand that? All right, go back to Genesis chapter 45. So when he says in verse 5, now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that doesn't mean that people should not feel guilty for their sins and think, well, it's all in God's plan. I did this, but God's the one who orchestrated it. God had it predetermined, so it's really God doing it. I don't have free will. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying, don't worry about it. You don't have to feel bad about what you did to me as far as my personal suffering, because I'm not holding it against you. God made something good come out of it. That's what he's saying. And then he says, verse 6, for these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Verse 8, so now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. Well, it was both, actually. And we saw other examples in the Bible how it was both. It was more than just one person who was taking responsibility for certain actions. God, a lot of times God ultimately will take responsibility for certain events because he's ultimately in control and he allows these things. Nothing can happen without God allowing these things. So it's just like the case of Job. God, in a sense, took responsibility. He says to Satan, you moved me against him without cause. Why would God say that? Because ultimately God could have intervened and said, no, Satan, you can't do anything. But I'm giving you permission. Therefore, in a sense, I'm taking responsibility. That's why God took responsibility in the death of his son and still held people accountable for doing it. You see? So don't just take this one verse like this and run with it. You have to see what the whole counsel of God teaches with these doctrines. All right, verse 8. He says, so now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. Now Goshen is a region in Egypt. Goshen is actually, sounds like from the Bible, it's a very fertile region in Egypt. Go to Genesis chapter 50. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I want to look at something else. 47, chapter 47, verse 6. Chapter 47, verse 6. When Jacob finally goes up there, he says, the land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. So Goshen is the eastern region of Egypt. Go to Exodus chapter 9. And when the plagues were put on Pharaoh, in the book of Exodus, the children of Israel were in Goshen and they were unaffected by the plagues. Exodus chapter 9, verse 26. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. All right, back to Genesis chapter 45. Says, go bring my family, come back up, you guys can dwell in the land of Goshen. He says, and thou shalt be near, verse 10, thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children and thy flocks and thy herds and all thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. Now, I'm sure that was an interesting conversation there. I'll bet they were apologizing left and right till they were blue in the face. Joseph, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. And, it was really Judah. Judah's the one. Judah, there was probably a lot of blaming and blame shifting and apologizing and this and that. And Joseph, guys, just don't worry about it. I'm telling you, I don't want to hear it. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. I promise. I'm not mad at you anymore. No, Joseph, I'm so sorry. I don't know what we were thinking. Oh, please, don't be mad at us. Stop saying that. I already told you I'm not mad at you. Quit it. Verse 16. But you know what? They don't believe him fully. They don't. Verse 16. Oh yeah. And I imagine they're saying, Joseph, but tell us how? What happened? How did you go from a slave boy to this? And he probably told him the whole story. Well, you wouldn't believe what happened. I was falsely accused, and I was in prison, and this and that, and these two guys had these dreams, and I interpreted their dreams. And then later on, Pharaoh had a dream, and nobody couldn't. So then the butler, he remembered, and he told him about me and this, that, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, Joseph, that is so wonderful. Verse 16, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beasts and go. Get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your household, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones, and for your wives, and bring your fathers and come. Also regard not your stuff. Don't worry, all your belongings and all that stuff that you have down in there in Canaan, don't worry about it. You're going to we'll replace that with way better stuff. I mean, you know, your furniture. Hey, when you get here, you'll have the best of the best. You'll have brand new coil wood furniture, and I mean, it'll just be. Believe me. We're going to make it up to you. Don't even think about bringing that old piano and all that stuff. You're going to have brand new stuff when you get here, the best of the best. Regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And now, notice he gives Benjamin 5 times as much as the others. Do you remember there was something else that he gave to Benjamin that was 5 times more? Food. What's this emphasis on Benjamin? Why does Joseph have such this affinity for, and this? That's his full brother. The other ones are all half brothers.
Benjamin didn't betray him.
Mm-hmm. And so Joseph says, "Okay, here's first class tickets for your family to fly first class. And when they get here, we're going to put them up in the best 5-star resort in Egypt, the best that Egypt has to offer." Accommodations. Go get them. Verse 23. And to his father he sent after this manner, 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. Meaning, could mean a few things. Some people say, make sure you guys don't mess this up. Make sure you guys don't get in a big fight or something and somebody claim all this stuff and take it for yourselves and don't come back. Make sure you stick to the plan. And don't get jealous and who knows what. Verse 25, and they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. Now, can you imagine this? Imagine they are coming back. Jacob says, okay, here you go. Take Benjamin, go get Simeon, go get more food. And they're coming back. And what does he see in the distance coming back? This caravan of all of these animals and these wagons. And he's saying, what in the world is this? Are these my sons coming back with food from Egypt? And they arrive and they say, Papa, Papa, Father, Father, Joseph, our brother, Joseph, your son, Joseph is alive. And he's, after 20 years, Jacob, who thought that he had been dead for over 20 years, is thinking, no way. You got to be kidding. This is unbelievable. How in the world could, even if it's true, how in the world could they discover it? And he didn't believe it. Verse 27. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Now, first he doesn't believe it. Then he says, now wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Joseph is the governor of Egypt? And he's actually helping us? And he wants all of us to move to Egypt? Now I really know you guys are lying. And they said, Father, wait, come here, look what he gave us. Not only all this food, not only all of our money back. Remember all the money you gave us to go buy food? Look, we still have all the money. We still have all this food. Look at all of these extra animals, all these donkeys. What did it say? 10 asses and 10 she-asses, right? 20 donkeys, extra donkeys. And these wagons. They said, Papa, look at these wagons. This is from Egypt. Look, it's handcrafted. It says made in Egypt. I mean, this is the real deal. I'm serious, Papa. How could we have all this if what we're telling you is not true? He says, he's jumping up and down for joy. And it said in verse 28, and Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. Oh, I can't believe it. I'm an old man. I was so worried. I couldn't even sleep at night when you guys left with Benjamin. Benjamin was gone. Simeon was gone. And I was having nightmares. I was waking up in the middle of the night. I was looking around and I was scared to death that I was going to lose Benjamin. And now Benjamin, you brought him back and you're telling me that not only Benjamin, but even Joseph is alive. I'm going to go see my son in my old age before I die, while I have the strength to make the journey. Now, did they tell him how Joseph ended up in Egypt?
Oh, no.
Did they? How do you know? It says in verse 27, they told him all the words of Joseph which he had said unto them. Well, some of the words he told them was did they conveniently leave that out? I wonder. I don't know either, but I would imagine that they're thinking, no, wait a minute. When we get to Egypt and Dad sees Joseph and he's going to ask him how, because we brought the coat of many colors with blood on it to him. So obviously Jacob's going to be wondering, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. You guys found his coat of many colors in the field with blood on it, and you brought it to me, and I was led to believe that he was killed by a wild animal, and now he's still alive, so I can't wait to ask him what happened. How did he end up in Egypt? And the brothers, now if they don't tell him, they're thinking the same thing. Papa is going to ask Joseph, and they're talking amongst each other. They're probably had this conversation before they get back home on the journey, and they're thinking, now wait a minute. We have some explaining to do to Dad.
How are they going to do it?
Exactly.
The reason why I'm not sure is because wouldn't that have gotten really mad when they told him they sold him?
Of course.
For 20
Why
years.
didn't he get angry?
But they're probably thinking, well, he's going to ask Joseph, obviously. He's already asking us, how did Joseph arrive at this position? What happened? How did this happen? And they say, well, he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and this, and that. Okay, but how did he get to Egypt in the first place? I thought you guys found his coat of many colors with blood on it. You understand? So they're in a... They are.
I'm thinking Simeon might have said, tell him what happened because he wanted to bring Joseph back to you, but they already sold him. There's nothing I could do.
Well, seems to me that Jacob's going to find out one way or the other. He's going to find out either before he gets there or when he gets there. And it's in the best interest of the brothers to tell him sooner than later, so that by the time, all this time passes, he'll have time to settle down a little bit and just rejoice in the fact that Joseph is still alive. If they wait, that's my thought. Either way, they're in a very uncomfortable situation. And can you imagine when their dad did find out, or however he found out, or when he found out, what his reaction would be toward them? You guys sold your brother into slavery and made me think that he had been killed by a wild animal, and you were going to let me go down to my grave thinking that my favorite son was dead. That was a tough situation. Whether it was he found out before he got there, and that journey all the way there, and then those guys are married, and their wives, I want a divorce. How could you? I can't even stand to look at you. How could you be so wicked to sell your own brother and then lie to your dad and say he was killed? So, even though Joseph is not mad at them, they still dug themselves a grave. It's pretty comical when you think about it. Okay, now, told you before, Joseph is a strong type of Jesus Christ. And you've probably noticed through there, oh yeah, that's kind of like Jesus Christ. That's similar to Jesus. I told you, for those of you who haven't been keeping up with this, I'm intentionally ignoring the types of Christ because I'm going to wait till the end, and then we're going to go and look at all the types of how Joseph was a type of Jesus Christ. And we're going to do it all in one lesson instead of just going a little bit here and there all the way through and just get sidetracked. I think it's going to be better that way so we can focus more on the different details. Anybody have any questions about that today?